the search for the manger of Jesus is fraught with obstacles. Time, tradition, even vested interest. Israel has been a contested land since the beginning of recorded history. It is a contested land today. At the heart of Israel is Jerusalem. Where once stood the great temple, today stands the Dome of the Rock, the Western Wall, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Only a few miles to the south of Jerusalem is the Church of the Nativity, in the heart of the modern city of Bethlehem, the place celebrated as the birth site of Jesus since the 4th century. A mile to the east from the Church of the Nativity is the place known today as Bet Sahur, where the Catholic Church identifies the shepherd's fields and the inn recognized from the story of Mary and Joseph. On the other side of modern Bethlehem, just a few miles away, is the location known as the Tomb of Rachel. But what if new archaeological evidence were found to call into question each of these traditional locations? The key is the ancient place known as Bethlehem Ephrat, the location of what the Bible calls the Tower of the Flock, known in Hebrew as the Migdal Eder. To find the original Bethlehem Ephrat would be to find the burial place of Rachel, the threshing floor of Ruth and Boaz, the hometown of David, the inn where Mary and Joseph were turned away, the fields where the shepherds kept watch on the night of Jesus' birth. To find the real manger of Jesus would be a find to rival the Dead Sea Scrolls or the tomb of Tutankhamun. Today, incredible new archaeological finds have revealed startling clues to where things recorded in the Bible may have actually happened. This is a story of ancient history, a story of modern conspiracy, and a story of contemporary archaeology.
Yeshua, the Messiah, Jesus the Christ, born right around that corner in that room 2,000 years ago.
It's a story that begins with a pregnant woman and the birth of a baby boy. Not Mary, not Jesus, Rachel and Benjamin. Join us on a journey to discover the real manger of Jesus Christ. According to the Bible, Jesus was born in a small village known as Bethlehem Ephrat, the fulfillment of a prophecy of Micah, a prophecy written in the 8th century BC.
But you, Bethlehem Ephrat, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times.
Bethlehem Ephrat first appeared in the Bible 2,000 years before the time of Jesus, when Jacob buried his beloved wife Rachel at the Tower of the Flock in the village of Bethlehem Ephrat. But where exactly was Bethlehem Ephrat? In 2005, American Rick Ham discovered an inscription in a cave just over a mile to the east from the traditional Rachel's tomb. He thought the strange scratch marks looked like a form of ancient writing, but he wasn't trained in ancient languages, so he called upon someone who was.
In 2005, Rick Ham actually had me come down here to look at what he thought might be an inscription. And he told me, he said, Steve, I think there might be an inscription in this cave. I don't want to go with you or point it out. If it's real, I want you to be able to find it on your own. I walked in and saw it. Wasn't sure what it was at first. It's kind of hard to read. Found some other writing that we believe is ancient cuneiform. Still not even sure exactly what it says. So we took as detailed pictures as we could of these and took them back home and began to work on them and look at the details and try to decipher what this possibly is.
For 4 years, Dr. Steve Smith reflected on the strange marks in the cave wall. One day he had an epiphany. The scratchings on the wall were older than he'd been considering.
Well, first of all, there's two different types of Hebrew. There's the Hebrew script after the Babylonian captivity, which is a square script, kind of like the script they use today, and then the script before they went into exile, which is a Paleo-Hebrew. What we see here is 3 ancient Hebrew letters in the Paleo-Hebrew. Here we see the Resh, looks kind of like a backwards P. The middle letter is a Chet, there's 2 crossbars. And the third letter is a Lamed. Those 3 letters spell Rachel's name, Raquel. We believe Jacob inscribed this on the wall when he buried his wife here almost 4,000 years ago. We believe this was written around 1900, 1910 BC. That being the case, this would make this the oldest Hebrew inscription found to date, the oldest alphabetic inscription found to date, and possibly the oldest inscription ever found.
The discovery of the Rachel inscription launched Rick Ham on a quest to explore further the history of this cave and the area around the cave, a place known today as Bir El Kut. Could this be the burial sepulchre, the ancient tomb of Rachel? If so, that would be a key that could unlock a great many mysteries of the Bible. The connection between the tomb of Rachel and the manger of Jesus Christ centers around the name of a small village, Bethlehem Ephrat. The first mention of Bethlehem Ephrat is in relation to the burial site of Rachel, as recorded in the book of Genesis.
Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrat, that is, Bethlehem. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day that pillar marks Rachel's tomb. Israel moved on again and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder, the tower of the flock.
The Bible's very clear of where Bethlehem Ephrat is. If you find Rachel's tomb, you find the real Bethlehem.
But anybody can find Rachel's tomb today. The traditional Rachel's tomb was first identified in about the 8th century AD. An Ottoman-era domed structure was erected along a desert road that today sits on the outskirts of modern Bethlehem. The traditional Rachel's tomb draws thousands of visitors each week and is considered the 3rd holiest site in Judaism.
Today there is a magnificent memorial on the road to Bethlehem that has been kept for almost 2,000 years.
Today, the traditional Rachel's tomb sits in the shadow of a 26-foot barrier wall that divides the Palestinian West Bank from the State of Israel. The historic building has been fortified, surrounded, and virtually obscured.
Rachel in the Jewish world is always Mother Rachel. I mean, she has this very special role. I mean, if there were saints, she would be the saint par excellence.
Every day of the year, Jews and visitors come to Rachel's tomb. They come to pray. They come to pay their respects.
Rachel is one of our mother.
She represents goodwill, generosity, kindness, empathy, everything that the world needs. Not destruction, not blowing your kids up.
She's very important for us. Yeah. Important mother for us. Yeah, it's our mother. It's like our mother.
She had her baby right here, Mother Rachel, and she was buried right here.
But is this really the site where Rachel was actually buried? Many have their doubts.
The present location of the tomb might fit, might not. At the moment, all we have is just a medieval building and nothing more.
Dr. Shimon Gibson is a former head of the Research and Scientific Reports Department of the Israel Antiquities Authority and is currently the Senior Associate Fellow at the W.F. Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem. He's also an adjunct professor of archaeology at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. He has uncovered puzzling historical references to Rachel's tomb, references that seem to indicate a location far from the traditional site. One such reference is from a 6th century scribe known as the Piacenza Pilgrim.
The Piacenza Pilgrim, an early Byzantine account that we have, describes the road which leads from Jerusalem towards the south. On the way to Bethlehem, at the 3rd milestone from Jerusalem, lies the body of Rachel on the edge of the area called Ramah. We're very close to the 3rd mile from Jerusalem, and this is the landscape. This is the landscape that Piacenza Pilgrim is referring to. Here it's very clear. It says on the 3rd mile, you can see the place of burial of Rachel, and nearby there's a church. Now, at the 3rd mile, if you calculate it, this is the church of Katisma.
These are the remains of the octagonal church known as Katissima, erected by Queen Helena in the 4th century. The Jews called this place Selsach and remember it as the place where Rachel died during childbirth. Christian tradition holds that Katissima is also the place where 1900 years after Rachel, a pregnant Mary rested on her way to Bethlehem Ephrat. These ruins, identified as the real Katissima, were only recently discovered.
Before this, we thought that Katissima is on Ramat Rachel, but now we know that it is there. According to the Christian tradition, the mother of Jesus sit there when they go to the Bethlehem.
And that means that the Ramah, where one has to seek out the tomb of Rachel, has to be situated somewhere in the vicinity of the Katisma church.
Katissima was discovered along the side of a well-known ancient road called the Patriarch Road, a way that today is a modern highway. The Patriarch Road was long and well used, starting far north of Nazareth, continuing south past Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and moving into and beyond the Negev desert. But there was another road, a crossroad, that intersected with the Patriarch Road right next to Katissima.
Before there were roads, there were derech. In English it's translated a pathway.
Moshe Bronstein has been walking the derech, seeking out artifacts from Israel's history for nearly his entire life. A respected historian, Moshe has taught people from all over the world about the land, the culture, and the language of ancient Israel.
Now, when Jacob and Rachel coming in here, there were no milestones, there was no road, there was nothing. There was only a pathway.
Any intersection of two major derricks would have been a busy and important place, the kind of place where people and animals would have needed water. This large cistern pool was only recently discovered. It sits no more than 30 yards south of the Katissima church and is known as the Pool of Benjamin.
We are at the most important crossroad junction here. This beautiful, carved, built-up pool, it's a water pool that called Benjamin's Pool. This is from the time of Jacob.
In the search for Rachel's tomb, the Piacenza Pilgrim gives us a vital clue. At the 3rd milestone from Jerusalem, he said, we have found the roads. Now we have even found the milestones.
This is a milestone that his head is lying in here. Okay, the minute you find these milestones, you know that the road, okay, cannot be anywhere else.
The road from Katissima leads directly here, right past the very same cave inside which Rick Ham discovered the Rachel inscription. On the inside walls of this cave is also an abundance of cuneiform-style writing. Something happened in this cave a long time ago. But what? One incredible clue has come from the discovery of this clay figurine. This figurine stands about 18 inches tall and was discovered in this cave in the 1940s. Made of clay and hollow, she offers the sign of peace with her right hand and holds what may have been a shepherd's staff in her left. But what is truly fascinating is that in 2012, something was found inside her. Stuffed in dirt and held within the statue were these clay figurines. Similar to others found from the region of Haran and dated to approximately 2000 BCE, these are known as teraphim, or household gods. To explore why idols like these might be found in this very cave, we turn to the biblical story of Rachel and Jacob.
The first time we meet Rachel in Genesis is this famous scene at the well. Jacob is on the run. Jacob has betrayed his brother Esau, has had to run for his life, and so he is going away to spend some time with his uncle.
Jacob was the son of Isaac and Rebekah, the grandson of Abraham and Sarah. As a young man living in Canaan, Jacob had deceived his father Isaac and stolen the birthright that rightfully belonged to his older brother Esau. His brother was furious, and on his mother's advice, Jacob fled Canaan and headed north to Haran.
In the ancient day, probably the best place to stop to see people was at the well.
The search for the manger of Jesus Christ begins with Rachel, because through her we are introduced to Bethlehem Ephrat. Rachel's father was a man named Laban, her older sister Leah. They lived in an area of Upper Mesopotamia called Haran. Rachel was a shepherdess, and one day while she was tending her sheep, she met a man named Jacob.
And he meets this young woman, Rachel, and it's a story of love at first sight. As far as Rachel, she seemed to have stunning beauty.
Jacob loved Rachel, and he worked 7 years for her father in exchange for her hand in marriage. But her father, Laban, tricked Jacob and substituted his older daughter, Leah, in the marriage tent. Laban then demanded another 7 years of labor for the daughter Jacob truly desired, Rachel. Jacob fathered 10 sons and 1 daughter, but none by way of Rachel, for she was barren. Then, the Bible says, God remembered Rachel, and her womb was opened. She gave birth to a son of her own. She named him Joseph. After Joseph was born, Jacob decided to break away from the father-in-law and return to his own ancestral homeland, the land of Canaan. Fearing that Laban would not approve, Jacob and all his family and flocks left at night, without saying goodbye.
On the 3rd day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead.
Interestingly, Rachel holds on a little bit to the past, and she ends up taking some of the family idols.
What have you done? You've deceived me, and you've carried off my daughters like captives in a war. But why did you steal my gods?
Rachel, in fact, was hiding her father's idols, called teraphim in Hebrew, and was sitting on them in her tent.
Don't be angry, Father, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period.
You know, when Jacob is there and Laban is threatening him, he says that he will get rid of anybody who would possess these. He doesn't know what Rachel has done, and that adds drama to the story because, you know, heaven forbid, what would happen if he found that Rachel indeed had these?
Jacob continued on to the south, and Rachel never let her husband know that it was she who had taken her father's idols. And later on that same journey, Rachel gave birth for the second time in her life. On the way to Bethlehem Ephrat, she stopped at the side of the road at a place that would come to be known as Ketissima.
While they were still some distance from Ephrat, Rachel began to give birth and had great difficulty. As she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named her son Ben-Oni, but his father named him Benjamin.
And very interesting, she's laying there in the last word that come as she dies. As her concubine said, don't worry, everything will be all right. She let two words go out, Ben-Oni. It's Oni with an Aleph, which means the sperm seed of God in me.
So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrat, that is, Bethlehem.
Rachel dies, and Jacob carrying her. It's written, Keberat Derech.
Where did they walk? How far did they go? In Hebrew, the Bible records that they walked Kebrat Derech. Until recently, nobody knew what that actually meant.
In Hebrew, when we did not understand, we made up too. We said Kebrat Derech, it's a kind of a distance. But when we opened the Akkadian library not too long ago, okay, in Babylon, we found that Kebera or Bera is Parsa. Parsa is a distance of 1 mile and 400 yards.
If we travel down the Matriarch Road at Kibrat Derech, or a mile plus 400 yards, we find ourselves just outside the very cave where we found the inscription, where we found the ancient writing, where we found the statuette.
Then he carried her from the 3rd mile to the 4th mile. And there he lay her in a cave.
She was probably buried in a cave. That's the normal way that burials took place in these earlier periods.
In ancient burial customs, a person's personal articles were often laid with them in their tomb or sepulchre. It is certainly conceivable that the maidservant, the same one who was with Rachel when she died, may have buried this statue and the hidden teraphim along with Rachel. Could these small idols, hidden inside this statue that was found in this cave, possibly be the very idols Rachel took from her father Laban nearly 4,000 years ago? The search for the manger of Jesus Christ has led us to this small, nondescript site known today as Bir El Kut. This is where American Rick Ham found an ancient inscription spelling out the name Rachel in the Paleo-Hebrew language on the wall of this cave. That find has led us to examine what else may have taken place on this location. It's a question that brings us back to the relatively recent history of World War II.
In World War II, the Nazis have had a plan. It was to control the world. They started with a plan of kill 18 million Jewish people. But the Jews were only the first. Then came all the Christian. Then came all the Muslim. They destroyed all the synagogues and burned all the books, which this should have been a candle and a torch to all the world to understand that they are actually coming against the Bible. They are not coming against the Jewish people only.
The effort to prevent the Nazis from controlling the world became the deadliest conflict in all of human history. On one corner of the conflict was an heroic Polish Jew who gave everything he had in order to preserve the most precious artifacts in the Holy Land. We will refer to him simply as the Preserver. For even 70 years after the war, his name cannot be released for the sake of the safety of the men who helped him and their families. The fascists were intent on building a museum where they would display the most valuable artifacts from the religion they intended to destroy. The Nazis needed an expert to identify the finds they were taking from the Holy Land.
So they brought the Nazis into that, and to spare his life to serve them.
The Preserver cooperated, or at least appeared to cooperate with his captors. He directed them towards certain items and artifacts, but he cleverly led them away from others. There was one site he was particularly concerned about: Bir El Kut. Bir El Kut sits on the northern slope of a fertile valley, about 4 miles south of Jerusalem. Directly south of Bir El Kut is the modern city of Bethlehem. In the 1940s, any talk of the manger was focused, as it is today, squarely at the Church of the Nativity. the preserver had great interest in this valley. A valley that reveals an amazing array of ancient terraced fields, watchtowers, stone walls, olive groves, and long-forgotten pathways.
And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night.
In Luke, we have a reference to shepherds who are out in the vicinity of Bethlehem, and they see the star, a bright star in the heavens, and that leads them, of course, to the manger where Jesus was born. The question is, where were these shepherds located?
The preserver believed these were the shepherds' fields, the ones related to the Tower of the Flock. He sent word to some of his friends to quietly remove certain artifacts from the Bir El Kut site, items he believed were of such religious significance and value that they needed to be hidden from the fascist marauders. Not long after, an archaeologist did show up at Bir El Kut. In 1946, the Vatican sent a priest and personal friend of Mussolini's to do excavations in the Holy Land. His name was Virgilio Corbeau. To find out more about Corbeau and his dig at Bir El Kut, we went with archaeologist Shimon Gibson to visit the Studium Biblicum Franciscanum in Jerusalem, the place where Corbeau's findings from his dig at El Kut are displayed today.
Is it a Spanish team working there? Do you remember Father Corbeau speaking about this site, Bir El Kut?
Really, I don't remember him to speak about this place, but more about Siyar el-Ghanem.
Siyar el-Ghanem lies just across the valley from Bir El Kut, about 1 mile below and to the east of the Church of the Nativity. At Siyar el-Ghanem, which today is known as Bet Sahur, Corbeau found ruins, including this ancient inn. But according to other scholars like Shimon Gibson, these ruins date back to the 8th century AD, 800 years after the time of Mary and Joseph. And while Corbeau completely dismissed the Bir El Kut site as having any biblical significance, he quickly proclaimed Siyar el-Ghanem as the home of the Inn of Mary and Joseph.
The question is, are we in Bethlehem? No, we are not. If this is the shepherd's field that the Bible talk about, then we need to meet here. Rachel, Jacob, Israel, the inn where the ladies stand, the burial place of Rachel. They needed to give a kosher certificate to this site, because otherwise their kosher certificate on the Church of Nativity is gone.
Father Corbeau thought that the Tower of Eder was in Siyar el-Ghanem. Do you know on what basis he thought the Tower of Eder should be at Siyar el-Ghanem? The Tower of the Flocks, you know, Tower Migdal Eder.
No, I remember him discussing about the presence of the shepherds. Archaeologists must follow what they found.
Yes.
They don't have to invent.
After 7 years of excavation, Corbeau ultimately proclaimed that Bir El Kut was nothing more than an 8th century Georgian monastery and agricultural location.
About Bir El Kut, there is not a very important conclusion.
But even by his own writings, we learn that Corbeau did realize that some things had apparently been tampered with at the site before he arrived.
The Oshuri cave is formed of a natural cave. The rock was covered all over in hard plaster and smooth limestone. Nothing was found because the environment has been violated.
What Corbeau didn't realize was that this monastery was established above earlier remains. And that we know for certain because there's a burial cave that I've looked at in passing, which definitely dates back to the time of Jesus. And then there are other remains scattered around which suggest earlier activities.
Neither the Church of the Nativity nor Corbeau's Siyar el-Ghanem have found any archaeological connection to the Migdal Eder, the Tower of the Flock. But at Bir El Kut, the remains of a large tower have been found. Is it possible that the shepherds' fields were not on top of the ridge at Seir el-Ganam, but rather down in the valley near Bir el-Kut?
And I went through all of the earliest Byzantine sources that we have relating to Shepherd's Field, and the earliest I came across was written by a nun by the name of Egeria, who came from the west, and she went on a tour of all of the sites associated with the Old Testament and with Jesus, and she arrives at a place which are called At the Shepherds, which is, and this is really interesting, in a valley near Bethlehem. Now she's writing in 384 AD, so we're one of the really early sources relating to this region. So she's talking about a valley. Now, the traditional sites of Shepherd's Field, which are pointed out today, are sites which are located on top of a ridge. This is the valley, which is close to Bethlehem.
It seems that according to the eyewitness report of the nun from Egeria in 384 AD, the Shepherd's Fields were not recognized at that time as being where they are currently identified. And if the Shepherd's Fields were instead in this valley, near Bir el-Kut, might it be reasonable to expect to find the manger nearby as well? To find the real manger of Jesus Christ, we must find the real Bethlehem Ephrat, the original house of David. On the northern edge of this valley, about halfway up its slopes, we find the remains of an ancient complex with a neighboring threshing floor. And after the burial of Rachel, the next reference in the Bible to Bethlehem Ephrat comes from the book of Ruth, in a story that takes place in the 11th century BC.
In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi.
While in Moab, Elimelech and both his sons died. Naomi had no choice but to return to her homeland, now a destitute widow. But one of her daughters-in-law, Ruth the Moabite, decided to return with her.
Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God.
Ruth and Naomi returned to Bethlehem Ephrat in Judah. It was the season of the barley harvest, and the workers were in the fields. Ruth caught the eye of a landowner from the clan of Elimelech named Boaz. He showed her great kindness. And one evening, at Naomi's urging, Ruth came to him on the threshing floor. Uncovered his feet and lay down next to him. A good threshing floor is at an elevation where the breeze is gentle but steady. Too much wind and the wheat blows away. Too little and the chaff does not. At Bir el-Kut, there is a perfect natural threshing floor.
What is a threshing floor? Where you divide the seeds of wheat or barley from the chaff, which is another word, lechem.
Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along.
The book of Ruth records that Boaz went up to the town gate, where he met with the elders to discuss his intentions regarding Ruth and Naomi.
In the morning, Boaz comes here, at this gate.
The modern city of Bethlehem and the Church of the Nativity already sit along the top of a high hill, so there is no place to go up from those locations to a town gate. But at Bir El Kut, there is a tall hill right next door, Ramat Rachel.
Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrath and be famous in Bethlehem."
This is the view from the top of Ramat Rachel. Ramah is the Hebrew term for high hill, and this Ramah looks directly down onto the El Kut site. Bir El Kut fits perfectly into the story of Ruth and Boaz. We have a threshing floor. We have a city up the hill in the proximity. And if you find the Bethlehem of Ruth and Boaz, you've found the Bethlehem of David.
Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah.
That's why David is called the Ephrathite.
Boaz, the father of Obed, Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David.
David growing there, in that inn, in the shepherd field, in the same very place that Jesus came later on. This is the same very place that Rachel was buried nearby. That's David's home.
The search for the manger of Jesus must be rooted in the search for the hometown of David, because Mary and Joseph went back to the town of David when Jesus was born. Incredibly, there are new finds that identify Bir El Kut with the house of David. Finding the location of the house of David would be an incredible clue in the search for the manger. Symbols, even more than words, may provide the key to understanding.
It's unbelievable what we have in here. This is the house of David emblem. This is the crocus flower. We see here a 6 leaves emblem of a flower that's called the crocus. And I know the timing of it is the time of the house of David, people.
The 3-leaf lily flower, the fleur-de-lis, or the fully opened version as a 6-petaled crocus, either one, were the emblems of the house of David, just as the 6-pointed star of David would one day become the emblem of the state of Israel. When David was still a young man, the time of the judges came to an end in the land of Israel. The people wanted a king, so the prophet Samuel selected one for them, a tall young man from the tribe of Benjamin named Saul. Saul's story directly intersects with our search for the manger, for Saul is immediately sent by Samuel to, of all places, the tomb of Rachel.
Then Samuel took a flask of olive oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him, saying, "Has not the Lord anointed you ruler over his inheritance? When you leave me today, you will meet 2 men near Rachel's tomb, at Zelzah, on the border of Benjamin."
This passage references Rachel's tomb on the border of Benjamin. This could pose a dilemma for our cave. The border of Benjamin in the time of Saul is generally recognized about 3 miles to the north of the Bir El Kut site.
A lot of people have wondered throughout history whether Rachel's tomb really was north of Jerusalem rather than south of Jerusalem.
Rabbi Hagi Ben Artzi, brother-in-law of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, believes the tomb of Rachel is found here, north of Jerusalem, in a place called Kabur B'nai Israel.
So here is the tomb of Rachel. Amazing. And here it is, preserved forever. Almost 4,000 years past. There is no archaeologist who doubts this identification of this monument.
But there are those who disagree.
I spent a lot of time with my assistants picking up potsherds from the ground, and what we were able to come up with was that the pottery there dates from the late Iron Age. This is from the 8th or the end of the 8th century BCE onwards.
This is the burial place of the children of Israel. It's not the death place of Rachel. This is a much later on than Rachel.
These are not structures that could be associated with the time of King David or earlier, going back into the Bronze Age to the time of the Judges.
Perhaps Kabur B'nai Israel isn't the site of Rachel's tomb, but is it imperative that we look so far to the north? The book of Joshua details where the original borders were located.
The eastern boundary is the Dead Sea, as far as the mouth of the Jordan. The northern boundary started from the Bay of the Sea at the mouth of the Jordan, went up to Beth Hoglah, and continued north of Beth Arabah to the stone of Bohan, son of Reuben. The boundary then went up to Debir from the valley of Achor, and turned north to Gilgal, which faces the pass of Adumim, south of the gorge. It continued along to the waters of En-Shemesh and came out at En-Rogel. Then it ran up the valley of Hinnom, along the southern slope of the Jebusite city, that is, Jerusalem.
Since the northern border of Judah runs along the southern slope of Jerusalem, it appears that Bethlehem Ephrat could have been right on the border, as Samuel suggests.
We are being mistaken when we don't understand that there are different periods and the borders change.
The Bir El Kut site holds up under the geographic guidelines found in the biblical books of Joshua, Judges, and Samuel. But what about non-biblical references? For there is a school of thought that does not consider David nor his hometown of Bethlehem Ephrat to be historical in nature. New archaeology has something to say about that. If Bir El Kut was truly Bethlehem Ephrat, then it was the hometown of David, and was visited by the prophet Samuel. Samuel not only anointed Saul as Israel's first king, later he would walk the approximately 9 miles to Bethlehem Ephrat to find his successor, a young shepherd boy named David. But many academics maintain that David is more myth than man, more legacy than history.
We are, at least we try to be, intellectual human beings, and we are interested in the sources, in the roots of our civilization.
But yes, David, no, David, King David, this is a matter of controversy, deep controversy.
The Christian tradition regards Jesus as a descendant of the house of David, and Jews are waiting for the Messiah to come, and it will be the Messiah that will be from the house of David.
The Tel Dan Stela was the first extra-biblical reference to the house of David ever found. And then, in the early 2000s, major excavations along the southern slope of the Temple Mount uncovered an incredible ancient substructure, now identified as the City of David.
City of David is the ancient core of Jerusalem. The story of Jerusalem started there.
We are near the Gihon Spring, where everything in Jerusalem began. And this is the real place that the people start to live, here in Jerusalem. This is the place. Everything began here in this area.
Here, David conquered the city from the Jebusites and made Jerusalem his royal capital. In the summer of 2012, archaeologist Eli Shukran made a stunning find. He found a seal called a Bulah that connects David's Jerusalem with the town of Bethlehem.
Now comes Eli Shukran. and lift from the earth in the palace of David. A seal imprint with the name Bethlehem.
And one day we take a dirt from this area and then we sifted with the water and then we found a bulla. In that bulla there's the name of Bethlehem. Now we have the first evidence about Bethlehem outside of the Bible that tell us that the name Bethlehem is not just a story, it's a real city in the first temple period, here close to Jerusalem, south little bit of Jerusalem, and this is the first time that we know that Bethlehem is a city in the first temple period.
We could not have had a telegram from the Lord God as powerful as that.
The reign of David was the pinnacle of the United Kingdom of Israel. But during his grandson Rehoboam's reign, the 10 northern tribes split and formed the nation of Israel, or Ephraim. And the 2 southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, became the nation of Judah. Division made them each weaker, and by the 6th century BC, both nations had fallen to outside invaders. During that painful time in Israel's history, Rachel's name emerged again. As the Jews were marched past Rachel's tomb on their way to captivity in Babylon, the prophet Jeremiah wrote that they heard the voice of their mother Rachel crying out.
A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more.
Rachel cries out for her children even now. It would not be until 2,000 years later, almost 1,900 years, that there would be another woman by the name of Mary who would have another baby we call Jesus. And in that moment, an angel shows up in that time period and says, you need to leave now because Herod is going to kill everyone that is under the age of 2. And in the Gospels, you see that there's a connection between the matriarch of Israel, Rachel, and Mary, because the same verse is quoted.
A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more.
Rachel weeping from Ramah, for the children of Israel torn into captivity, for the innocent children slaughtered by Herod. This is the same Ramah where Boaz redeemed Ruth in the 12th century BC. The same Ramah where in the 6th century BC, Cyrus the Great built a Persian military outpost. Cyrus was the Persian king who conquered Babylon and let the Jews return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. He even supported the effort with the minting of these coins, perhaps the first coins ever used on earth. On one side of the coin, he put his own symbol, the eagle. On the other, the symbol of the house of David. And he inscribed the word Yahad, his new name for the region of Jerusalem. Cyrus put these coins in the hands of Zerubbabel, who brought them back to Judah to help fund the rebuilding efforts.
When Zerubbabel came back from Persia under Cyrus's rule, Cyrus commissioned him to come back and rebuild the temple. The first place he would have come to was to Ramat Raquel, which was the main Persian center at this time. Those Persian coins were found in this area, indicating that Zerubbabel and his men were truly in this area.
Zerubbabel couldn't rebuild the temple without also rebuilding Bethlehem Ephrat, if Bethlehem Ephrat was the supply house for all the holy elements used in temple worship.
We have a place across the valley they call Rachel's tomb. Another location they call the birthplace of Christ. Another location they call the Shepherd's Field. Various locations, but in none of those locations have we been able to find these Yehud coins, which are very important to this story.
The discovery of the Yehuda coins of Cyrus at Bir el Kut is compelling evidence that the Jews returning from Babylon came here. But coins were not the only evidence they left on the site.
Jerusalem at that time was not called Jerusalem, it was called Yahad. There was an entry to this cave with a door with an unbelievable menorah on it. And underneath down below, 3 letters written, Yod, Hey, Dalet, in ancient Hebrew letter, which are standing for the word Yahad. That it's exactly what we have on this coin.
If these coins date back to the time when the Jews were returning after 70 years in captivity in Babylon, we cannot help but ask, why were so many of them found right here at Bir El Kut? The house of David was a house of priests, for David was a priest. And in Bir El Kut we have found many items that suggest that Bethlehem Ephrat was a priestly village, perhaps even the primary supply house for the holy items used in temple worship. It is possible that in this small village the priests prepared the bread, the oil, the wine, and the sacrifices for temple worship. If so, we would expect to find artifacts there unique to the Jewish priesthood. Stone vessels are one sign of a priestly presence. They were used by priests for sacred oil lamps, for wine jars, and for olive oil, because unlike clay vessels, they held no impurities. This small oil lamp, made of stone, with the menorah carved along each side, indicates the sure presence of Levitical priests. This too was found here at Bir El Kut, but it is not alone.
Here what we have in front of us is this basin in here, a container made of stone again, to keep the purity of the priesthood.
On the site today we can still see an olive press, a wine press, bread ovens, stables for the sacred goats, and even this unique item.
It has a name. It's called Bodeda. The Jewish law says every 7th year you can just get enough olive, 1 cup a day, for whatever your daily usage. It's called the sabbatical law. You cannot but observe that law if you are people of the Lord.
When you find the location, you find everything. Fortunately, Bethlehem is the center. Because it's the second holiest place in all of Israel, you're going to find everything, the artifacts that the Bible talks about. We should find all, we have found all of it. Bethlehem, this Bethlehem, unequivocally the real thing.
The finds on the Bir El Kut site are accumulating. The inscription, the statue, and the teraphim from the time of Rachel and Jacob. The mile markers that identify the road and distance from Jerusalem. The discovery of the seal that connects the city of David to Bethlehem. The Yehuda coins and the engraved stone door that connect Rachel's cave to the time of Zerubbabel. And the stone vessels and Bodeda that reveal Bir El Kut as a Jewish center with a priestly heritage. Each of these stands in support of the hypothesis that this site, Bir El Kut, could be the location of the ancient Tower of the Flock, the Shepherd's Fields, the original Bethlehem Ephrat. But if this is the real thing, then we will need to meet 2 major characters from the Gospels here. We need to meet Mary and Joseph.
In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to his own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him, and was expecting a child.
2,000 years ago, there's a woman and a man, young couple, Mary, Joseph. They are coming to Bethlehem because the commandment, the law of the day was you must go back to your city of origin for the census.
She goes on the same way that Rachel and Jacob go. From Nazareth to here, from here, on the same exact way. She sits on the same very rock.
Mary and Joseph came from the north, as had Rachel and Jacob 1900 years prior. They traveled through Bethel, down the Patriarch Road, and according to Jewish sources rested at Ketissima, known by the Hebrews as Selsach, the very same rock on which Rachel died during the birth of Benjamin. From that rock, the same road, the same Kibrat Derek, or mile and 400 yards, would bring Mary and Joseph right past the monument at Rachel's tomb, past the Migdal Eder and the Tower of the Flock, and to the inn at Bethlehem Ephrat.
Couple 1, Jacob and Rachel, and a couple 2, Joseph and Mary. Both goes on the same way. How can it be so exact? How can it be so pure? How can it be so amazing if not God is doing it all?
This is an inn, only 80 steps from the Tower of the Flock. An inn from this era and region was not a kind of roadside motel. It was merely a sheltered collection of habitable caves, often supplemented by tents and awnings. This one encircles the ancient threshing floor, possibly the same threshing floor used by Ruth and Boaz. For whatever reason, Mary, though she was likely in labor by this time, was not welcomed at the inn. With little choice, Joseph may have taken her up this short hill and entered the complex of the Tower of the Flock, the Migdal Eder.
Actually, the Tower of Eder was a huge complex, a whole city, if you will.
An example of such a place is found here at the Tower of Afek near Tel Aviv. The night of Jesus' birth was a busy and crowded time in the village of Bethlehem Ephrat. Within the walls of the tower, Mary and Joseph would have encountered the sounds of people buying and selling, and the fragrances of animals, smoke, and cooking pots. But below the main level, there were a series of subterranean rooms, including a room called a manger, a place set aside where the sacred sacrificial goats were raised. Into such a manger came Mary and Joseph. A double-troughed stone manger was used to keep the goats from nipping one another, for sacrificial goats needed to be spotless and without blemish. The manger was often filled with seeds, soft enough for a bed. The room was lit by olive oil lanterns. And amidst the crowds and hustle of the census, in this one small subterranean room, Mary had a place of relative privacy, a place where she could give birth. They named him Jesus, Yeshua in Hebrew, Emmanuel, meaning God with us.
And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is Christ the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger."
Could it be that these fields were the shepherd's fields, that this inn was the inn, and that this was Bethlehem Ephrat.
The very heart of God, Yeshua, the Messiah, Jesus, the Christ, born right around that corner in that room 2,000 years ago.
Christ was born, the Messiah was born in the part where they birth the sacred lambs.
This is right around here. This floor used to be much lower. When you walk into that room, this is where they raised the La Adonai and La Azazel goats. This is the Yom Kippur goat that took away the sins of all of Israel. What we all grew up with the idea of the manger scene being in a stable, really an American stable, underneath a Christmas tree and so on and so forth. And reality and the truth is far, far different.
Is the truth that this room is the room where Jesus was born? There is another incredible find that makes the argument even more compelling. The discoveries and artifacts that have been found at Bir El Kut suggest that this site could be the site of the original Bethlehem Ephrat. But if so, what happened to the actual manger? There was a stone feeding trough, a manger, found in this very room. It was pulled from the site before Virgilio Corbeau came. The preserver, even while sitting captive to the Nazis in Switzerland, found a way to rescue some of the holiest artifacts ever discovered.
These rocks were smuggled out in the 40s. Before Israel was even a nation, they found these, and to keep them from being destroyed, they were smuggled out and brought here to the United States and sat in warehouses for almost 75 years.
Since then, the manger has been protected and hidden from the world, until now.
When I walked in here, I was not sure exactly what to expect. When you come into one of the greatest discoveries in the history of religious circles.
There's nothing like it in the history books, the archaeological books. Nothing like this has been found. This is unparalleled.
This is the moment, that unbelievable night, where John says that the Word of God tabernacled among us. And he cried when he was born, and they placed him in this trough, in this manger.
It's a stone manger. We often get the idea that it was a wooden thing that the cattle ate out of. This was where they birthed and kept the Passover lamb, the sacrifice lambs, the scapegoat lambs, that lamb perfect without spot and without blemish.
This manger may be the single most valuable artifact in the world. The preserver wanted to ensure that it never fell into the wrong hands.
In 1962, this group of people were flown from the Bethlehem area. I was contacted by these people. I'm honored to be trusted. No money in the world could have given it, and therefore they are not to be sold, but they are to be taught to people. So that's what I dedicated my life.
Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would be looking at and experiencing, touching, feeling the most incredible artifacts that man has ever seen, really up until this point, in both Judaism and Christianity.
Does the evidence hold up? Is it too soon to declare this to be the real manger? The feeding trough of the sacrificial goats? The birthing bed of Jesus? The arguments are persuasive, but there is more. The early church was made up of Jews and Gentiles coming together. They called themselves Christians. Surely they would have found a way to honor the heritage of Bethlehem Ephrat, to commemorate its history. It seems the early Christians were here prior to the Byzantine era of Constantine and Helena, for they left an indelible mark.
Inscriptions are very rarely found at archaeological sites. This is unfortunate, as opposed to, let's say, sites in Egypt or in Mesopotamia, where you have an abundance of inscribed material.
As I understand in archaeology, once you find an inscription, you're finished, because then you know exactly what you have. Inscriptions are rare. Well, we're looking at a very interesting, very significant, and frankly, an amazing archaeological discovery here. Honestly, the most amazing archaeological discovery I've ever seen in my life. This is incredibly significant because it's written in 3 languages. We have Aramaic, we have Latin, and we have Ancient Greek. The only time period that all 3 languages were commonly spoken in the world was 100 to 300 AD.
This is a model of the underground complex found at Bir El Kut. There were 3 subterranean rooms, and just outside the doorway to the second room, this mosaic was found lying like a welcome mat on the floor.
We have here in the ancient Aramaic, Yeshua, Damin, Beit, Alakma, Malkah, de Yehudia, Jesus from Bethlehem, King of the Jews. The Latin says, Jesus vus Bethlehem vus Rex Judiorum, which is Jesus of Bethlehem, King of the Jews. And the ancient Greek says, Jesus a Bethlehem a Basilius ton Judaion, which is, again, Jesus of Bethlehem, King of the Jews.
This mosaic seems to indicate that this site was recognized by the early Christian church as the birthplace of Jesus, and that they wanted everyone in the known world of that day to know about it.
If something is written in 3 languages, it means it's very important. A very important person to take the time to write 3 languages is of huge significance. And the 3 languages indicate that this person and this event was of worldwide significance.
Here in this part of the world, there are far and few between. So when you do find something which is inscribed, written, then you're onto a good thing.
So to me, this is just compared to pots and coins, those are all strong evidence. This, in my opinion, is smoking gun evidence of what we have here at this site.
But you, Bethlehem Ephrat, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times.
Our quest for the real manger of Jesus Christ began with an inscription found on the wall of a cave. We found that recent discoveries at Khatisima and Ramat Raquel corroborated accounts from ancient eyewitnesses, such as the Piacenza pilgrim and Gia of Egeria. We found ancient idols hidden within a statue that came from the site itself. And we found that the location was consistent with the ancient roads, the derechs, that are still visible today. From there we examined whether this could be the same Migdal Eder, the Tower of the Flock, that the Bible brings us back to in the time of Ruth, the time of David, the time of Zerubbabel, and the time of Mary and Joseph.
Once we have Rachel's tomb, we know we have the Tower of the Flock there. With the Tower of the Flock, we have the birthplace of David.
And everything is found there? Khatisima is there. Boaz is there. The shepherd's field is there. The manger is attached to.
Finally, for the first time, we are able to see those artifacts and to share them with the world. We've seen the door that was found just outside the cave with Rachel's name inscribed on the wall. We've seen the double-troughed stone manger. We've seen the three-language inscription that spelled out in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek the phrase, Jesus of Bethlehem, King of the Jews.
The connection between Jew and Christian in this whole realm is in a way off the charts, because you have the most, literally some would say, the most significant discovery that's ever been made in the history of Judaism, next to the Temple Mount. And you have arguably the most incredible discovery that's ever been made in the history of Christianity, but 50 yards from one another.
To be here, to see these artifacts, to touch them, this is real. We're touching Christ, we're touching Yeshua, we're touching David, we're touching Rachel, and I believe these artifacts bring them back to life, bring their stories, their life back to life and to the forefront for us.
Is this the real manger of Jesus Christ? Perhaps future excavations and study will discover more at this unique site. But for now, the evidence is in. Some will say no, some will say yes, and some will say the rocks are crying out.